I think it is very safe to say that the 2022 season did not pan out the way most Denver Broncos fans were hoping for and expecting. There ain't no way they had this planned out. You get a new head coach, and more importantly for the Broncos, finally made the decision to get a big-name quarterback in there, seeming to answer that question that had been nagging at this organization ever since the retirement of Peyton Manning. Like, you could forgive Broncos fans for not feeling at least a little bit of an excitement. They should have, I guess, although I was a little hesitant here before the season because, something didn't feel quite right about this. But, man, 2022 happened, and this season was an unmitigated disaster for the Denver Broncos. There is no other positive spin to put on that. Nathaniel Hackett proved to be in over his head from day one. Like, you look at that opening Monday night game against the Seahawks and remember the decision. You've got time left on the clock. It's 4th and 5. But instead of trusting your new quarterback that you've also given a shit ton of money to, you're going to want to kick a 64-yard field goal with Matt Prater. Like, that type of stuff right there from day one. The game management, the clock management was questionable, so bad that they ended up having to hire somebody to do that for him. He eventually ceded offensive play calling duties to Clint Kubiak. Like, it was bad from day one. Not only was Russell Wilson acquired for a big price, but then the team gave him a huge contract when they really didn't have to. And he didn't even simmer this year, let alone cook. If you think about it, the Broncos scored just 20 points in every loss this year, they'd be 10-5. Like, that's how bad the offense was. That's how bad Nathaniel Hackett was. That's how bad Russell Wilson has been. Score 20 points in every loss, which isn't even like a high standard of offensive football. That's just like barely middle of the road. Score 20 points a game, and this team's in the playoff race. They've got a playoff spot if they're 10-5, and they couldn't even do that. Their defense was elite this year, relatively speaking, and their offense somehow looked even worse, even though you made the big deal for Russell Wilson. So Nathaniel Hackett was shown the door before the end of his first year. Like, we saw this last year with Urban Meyer, but that was as much due to his treatment of people and how much of an idiot he was, whereas Nathaniel Hackett was just bad at his job. Like, this is like Lou Holtz with the Jets in the 70s type of bad. Like, that's how bad this was. And the thing is, now you're in a spot where they fired the head coach. There's going to be all types of questions about who they're going to bring into the fold. You're going to hear the names like the Sean Paytons, the Dan Quinns, etc. But I look at head coach and don't even think that's the biggest decision this team has to make. Frankly, it should be a new general manager, because the general manager who hired Nathaniel Hackett to fire him less than one full season in and made the deal to both trade for Russell Wilson and then give him the massive contract extension, George Patton, he's the one that should be shown the door. Like, how the hell does he still have a job is beyond me. But when you talk about the biggest decision that this organization has to make this offseason, it's what to do with Russell Wilson. And yes, this is absolutely a question they need to ask themselves, and this is a decision that they need to make, and there are a lot of factors here. It's not just a slam dunk. You just go in and say, hey, we'll try again in 2023, bring him back, and hopefully he'll do better. The decision is not as easy as that. I saw somebody the other day put on Twitter, I can't remember who it was, so my apologies for not being able to fully cite, but I remember it now. They were talking about Elway in like 91, had a bad year, and that's all fine and good, and then he bounced back later in his career. One key distinction was John Elway had already been a league MVP previously. John Elway had led the Broncos to 3 Super Bowl appearances in his 20s. John Elway was also only 31 years of age when he kind of had that bad season, that bad stretch of a season or two. Russell Wilson is 34, and the styles of play are different. and they don't necessarily bode well for Russell Wilson and the future and for the Denver Broncos. I mean, let's be honest here. Russell Wilson will be 35 years of age in the 2023 season. Just how much of a resurgence can one reasonably expect here? I think this comes back to asking a very important question before you make a big deal like this and say, hey, having a franchise quarterback is the single hardest thing to find in the National Football League. So many teams are desperate to find one all the time. But this team, talking about the Seattle Seahawks, not only had one, but was willing to move him and willing to keep their over 70-year-old head coach. That has to throw up some red flags for somebody, logical, rational thinking here, and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't trade for this fucking guy. The reality is that 2022 showed that Russ wants to play Russ ball, and he doesn't have the same abilities and same skills that he once did to be able to do that, nor does he have the same team and infrastructure to be able to pull some of that crap off anymore. I mean, he was really bad this year. And I say was as if we're not still in the season, but it doesn't matter at this point. Like, he sucked. And now you go into this offseason with all types of questions about what the hell to expect with the Denver Broncos. And, you know, the cost to move on already, like if the Broncos were to say enough is enough, like this is a sunk cost, we got to be smart about this, let's not kid ourselves into thinking something else is going to happen here. He stinks. This was a mistake. Let's get it over with. Let's move on as quickly as possible. Like, yeah, the cost of doing that is quite large, but what do you do? Because the cost of keeping him might be even greater. Like, if you look at Russ's 2023 cap number, this is something you're going to see it talked about a lot in the next few months. His cap hit is $22 million. His dead cap is $107 million. If he was released post June 1st, it's a $39 million cap hit, dead cap hit in 2023, $68 million in 2024. If he was traded after June 1st, the dead cap in 2023 decreases to $14 million. It's the same $68 million in 2024. And a lot of people are going to talk about that. I saw an article on Spot Track talking about Russell Wilson and that, you know, basically you can't move on from him until at least 2025 or after the 2025 season. And I think that's absolutely insane and just dead ass wrong. Yeah, those dead cap numbers are bad, but the cap hits, the cap numbers don't get better as this massive contract extension begins for Russell Wilson. If you look at the Broncos as it sits right now in 2024, they've got 80 plus million in cap space, and that's accounting for a $35 million cap hit for Russell Wilson. So if you said that $35 million cap hit instead became $68 million, yes, that bites into that available cap in 2024, but it's effing doable. And once you would get past that, that's it. You have the dead cap in 2023, the dead cap in 2024, and then it's over, and you're out from under it. Like if you said, oh, we're going to let him play in 2023, then thinking about 2024, his cap hits $35 million. The dead cap only decreases to $85 million. If he's released post June 1st, it's a $35.4 million dead cap hit in 2024 and a $49.6 million dead cap hit in 2025. I know a lot of you are hearing all these numbers and math and saying this is not fun. It's not really, but try being the Denver Broncos and realizing what the hell you signed up for here. So you're talking about if you wait and let him play in 2023 and then he still sucks, now you have kicked that can down the road even further, and you've got a $35.4 million cap hit if you release him for 2024, and a almost $50 million cap hit for 2025. And even if you talk about you're going to let him play 2 more years, you get to 2025, that offseason before the 2025 season, if he's released after June 1st or traded, it's an $18.4 million cap hit in 2025 and a $31.2 million dead cap hit in 2026. What do you think is the better solution here? Do you run it back? Try to find a head coach that can get more out of Russell Wilson? Is that coach even out there at this point, frankly? Or do you sit there and say, hey, this is not ideal, but this is really bad, and you got to cut ties and you got to cut your losses where you can? I find it very unlikely, personally, that the Broncos are going to move on in time for the 2023 season. I'd expect at this point that they're going to bring him back, but he was so bad this year, why risk it? Even if you say he has a bit of a resurgence, he's just going to come up and be an average NFL quarterback in 2023. If you're going based off of that, it would require such a massive turnaround from him, and it just feels unrealistic at this point. So why not get it done and out of the way now? Why not release him in this offseason post June 1st, bottom out, and minimize the mistake now? You can potentially position yourself well to draft a quarterback in 2024. You isolate the damage from the Russell Wilson contract extension to entirely in 2023 and 2024, and then you are free from it. Every year you keep him, you just kick that can down the road. Because there's no way in hell you could look at this contract that they gave him, this 5 years, $240+ million with $160+ million guaranteed, and say there's any realistic way you can envision that he's going to see the end of that deal in, 2029, when he's 40 years old? 2028, whatever the hell it is? Hell no. And you haven't seen anything that says, yeah, we're willing to kick the can down the road a few years because he was really good this year, so give us a few more and we'll figure it out later. He hasn't been. Like, there's one thing to say about being patient. There's also another thing to say that you're being stubbornly stupid. It's a very fine line here. And the Broncos need to really, really consider this and think about this, in my opinion. And my personal thought, they need to not futz around. Because, okay, let's say Russell Wilson comes back and he has a little bit of a better season in 2023, okay? And the Broncos win 9 or 10 games. Big whoop. Then where are you at? You're going into 2024 with a quarterback with a $35 million cap hit. That's average. Who's going to be 36. You already made the bad trade. You already made the horrendous decision to make him the contract extension. Why make it worse is my argument. And if you say, well, why would you bottom out? Well, you traded for and paid big money for Russell Wilson, and the Broncos frickin' suck this year. If you're going to suck, you might as well suck and get young and truly bottom out and start over. That's my thought. What say you? Should the Broncos run it back with Russ in 2023 and hope he finds some type of magical elixir that allows him to at least simmer, if not fully cook again? Or are you on my bandwagon of saying, this is a sunk cost at this point, the Broncos need to wisen up, and they need to move the hell on now? That's where I'm at. I think the financial arguments are only better to move on now as opposed to later. You can look at those dead cat numbers and say, man, they look really big in 2023 and 2024, but you could get out from under it entirely after 2024. If you have the opportunity to do that, I think you have to do it. You have to. They've got to send Russ packing in the offseason. They just do.